Rhonda Jimmerson and I met as members of the Air Force Survivor Advocacy Council. Her brother, Major Trojan Gilbert, was an F-16 pilot with over 1,000 flying hours. He was married with 5 children. He graduated from Texas Tech in 1993 with a degree in international economics. On November 27, 2006, his plane crashed in Iraq while he was protecting Americans whose helicopter had crashed. His body was ejected from the plane and immediately found and taken by Qaeda. They made videos in celebration and kept his body for 10 years. Finally, on October 3, 2016, his body was returned home. This podcast with Rhonda is about her fight to get her brother's entire body home. She shares her struggles as a sister to support her parents and to Troy's wife and children. She finished up with her faith and how she's persevered through one disappointment after another. Thank you for tuning in to Patriot to the Core podcast, episode number 79. I hope you enjoy. So, Rhonda, what was your relationship like with Troy?
As a child or as an adult? They were very different.
Well, tell us the difference. What was it like growing up with him? And I'm not sure who was older either.
Troy was 18 months older than me.
Okay.
And my father was in the Air Force, and we moved every 3 years. We always tended to move in May as soon as school let out. So there were many summers where all Troy and I had were each other. And so there were summers where we were best friends. And there were summers where we went through puberty together and were not best friends. So we did a lot of things together. We were constantly together, and just whether it was swimming or, down at the neighbor's house or riding bikes through all over base, we were together. As he got older, he was very handsome, and all of the girls loved him. So junior high school, he was very active with his friends at that time. So we drifted apart, as most kids do. As we got older and became adults, especially when he went into the Air Force, he is a natural born leader. And sometimes I don't follow well. So he would try to encourage me to make life choices that he thought was appropriate, and I tended to go the opposite direction.
There's an awesome picture of him playing baseball.
Yes.
I'm guessing he was about 11 or 12. I can't remember now, but that one where he's the only one looking up in the sky. What was that about?
Yeah, that was down in Del Rio, Texas at is it Laughlin? No, it's not Laughlin. Anyways, can't remember the base. I think it's Laughlin Air Force Base. And it's the whole team is sitting there, and he has his eyes on the little trainers that are flying all around us. And all he could do, he just wanted to look up. His eyes were always on the sky. He wanted to be a pilot. He would go down to the flight line and ride his bike down to the flight line and sit and watch the planes take off. He was always thinking about it.
Yeah, I think it was like an official team photo.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it's a funny picture. It's a good one.
It is. But that, since he was young, he always wanted to fly.
Okay, let's fast forward now on his final deployment. Why was he on that deployment? Because he had just had twins born, correct? His 4th and 5th children?
Yes, they had just been born. So that came about because at the time he was at Luke Air Force Base, and he was serving under General Robin Rand. And General Rand was taking over as commander of the 332nd Air Expeditionary Wing at Balad Air Base in Iraq. And General Rand at the time was mentoring Troy and encouraging him that if he ever wanted to make general in his career in the Air Force, that he needed to have these combat flying hours. And so under his command, Troy would volunteer to go. His squadron at Luke Air Force Base was not being sent. He actually went out and trained for a couple of weeks with the squadron that was flying from Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. And he flew one of their jets. But he was the only one from his squadron that went at the time.
So what can you tell us now? Let's talk about, I believe it's November 27th, 2006. I don't know where you want to start, Rhonda. If you want to start with being notified or just maybe what you found out since, but he crashed or he was shot down. What can you tell us about that day?
Well, that's the question that still stands out there. Air Force is very adamant that he went down because of target fixation, that he was not shot down. He was flying with in a two-jet formation with Michael Dietrich was his wingman. And at the time, there was some helicopters with Task Force 161, and they were made up of some Air Force, Army, all of different special forces. And one of their helicopters went down. And so they were stranded out in the desert. And there was a ridge or mountain, kind of maybe a mountainous area or a quarry, like a rock quarry nearby where just hundreds of Al-Qaeda members mounted this ridge and started firing upon them. They had rocket-propelled grenades, small arms fire, mortars. They had trucks with mounted heavy machine guns, and they were just being fired upon. There was 21, maybe 22. The count is not official. It's reported differently in different reports. 22 or 21 men on the ground at this time. And they were fighting back.
Did they have any cover at all?
No cover at all. They were out in the open, wide open. And so they were fighting. There was even one of the Little Bird helicopters, because it was a Little Bird that was hit, and the Little Bird would go, there were two of them, and the other Little Bird would go up and fire all of the rounds that it had and then land again. And they were taking ammunition off of the downed Little Bird using a Leatherman screwdriver, just trying to get as much ammunition as they could so that they could fight back. So the whole time that this is going on, they're screaming into the radio, "We need help. We need help." So help was coming. There was a group that was out clearing IEDs, an Army group, and they were about 40 of them, and they were clearing IEDs, and they were coming from the other side of this ridge, and they were driving up, but they were engaged with the Al-Qaeda members. They just kind of turned to the other side of the ridge, and they were firing upon them, so they were in an attack. At this time that all of this was going on, Troy was refueling, so his wingman was the only one there. There were 3 trucks that had mounted machine guns on them, and they had gone to a certain building and it just appeared like they continued to go to this building to get more ammunition. And so Task Force 161 requested bombs dropped on that one building. And so in that conversation, there was some confusion with targeting that building or marking that building. So there was a lot of screaming, a lot of fear because they were just running out of ammunition. And that is about the time that my brother Troy finished refueling, and he flew back and he engaged in the two-man formation. And he just came in very cool and calm and collected. He had a mission. He knew what he was doing. He was very much in control. The radio man on the ground has told us, time and time again, they call him Frosty because he was so just cool and collected at this point. His wingman dropped the bombs on the building, and then his wingman had to fly off to get fuel, to refuel. So then Troy was left there by himself. He then got eyes on those 3 trucks, and it took a little bit of time because there were civilians in the area. And so once he identified the 3 trucks, he did not want to lose visual confirmation at any point. He engaged. He came strafing in with his 20-millimeter Gatling guns, and he took out one of the trucks. And then he made a low, tight turn, trying to maintain that visual contact, and came back around and began strafing once again, trying to take out another truck.
What was his altitude?
Honestly, I don't know. I know that's in one of the reports, and I can get that if it's needed, but he was low. He was a couple 100 feet under where he should have been to make that low, tight turn. And he chose to do that because he didn't want. If he was doing the typical turn, he would not be able to maintain the visual contact. And civilian life was so precious to him. He didn't want to take out anybody in the area that was not associated with the attack. So he wanted to make sure that he maintained that visual contact. So, at this time, he is going in, strafing once again. And Betty, which is the alarm system within the plane, is screaming at him, "You're too low, pull up." But his mission was to take out that truck, and so he did pull up, but unfortunately it was just too late. His tail, when he pulled up, the tail of his plane hit the ground, and it was a farming field. He was further off from the quarry, and now he's into a field. His tail hits the ground, and then the belly of his plane slams down, and it skids for about 500 yards. At that time, debris is just kind of going everywhere from the plane. And so when the belly of his plane hits, his seat, the anchors of his seat, the force of that propels his seat up. He did not pull the ejection to eject his seat at any point, but it was that force of the impact of the belly of the plane hitting. And that shot his seat up, and as the canopy came up, it took off a portion of his scalp and some brain matter. And then he was ejected and rolled perpendicular to the crash. So the plane was going straight ahead, and he was shot off kind of at a perpendicular angle, and his body, still strapped into that seat, tumbled a few hundred yards in a perpendicular direction. And at that point, his parachute came out, but he didn't. We were told that he didn't pull the ejection handle.
Mm-hmm.
So
Rhonda, were you told at what point he died? Was it at ejection? Do you know?
It was immediately. Yeah, when his head hit that canopy, the edge of the canopy, he would have died immediately.
Okay. And he would have had a helmet on, right?
Yes, he would have had a helmet on. So the force of his seat coming up, and then, hitting that canopy, it took the helmet off. Plus, it's just kind of, how do you describe that? I don't know how to describe that.
No, it's okay. His body is out there.
It's out there.
And
yes.
No one else is around, at least no other Americans or, allies are out there. What happens?
So at this point, this draws the attention of all of those hundreds of Al-Qaeda members that were attacking. And they are drawn to the crash site. So they immediately go that direction. They took, with their phones, videos of them celebrating as they stood on the wing of the plane, and then continued to video. And you hear all of this talking in the background, or yelling, and then they all go running, because at that point they found the pilot. They took pictures of that site, of my brother on the ground, and that went on to the internet as well as the video that was played many times. But they at that point then decided that this pilot would be our trophy. So the Al-Qaeda members got 3 trucks that were very similar and brought a rug and rolled my brother's body up in a rug and put it in these 3 trucks, one of the 3 trucks. And then they took off. We did have eyes in the sky, and one of those gentlemen in that plane that was watching the area did watch the trucks as they left, and they watched as far as they possibly could. But at that time, there was still a very active site right there where Task Force 161 of those helicopters were still there, still fighting. You know, they weren't safe yet. They had to lose visual of the trucks that were carrying my brother. And they had to let him go. So they drove off.
So your family, from that point, when were y'all notified, and what did the Air Force tell you at first?
That day, the Air Force sent men out to my sister-in-law that morning. It was a Monday morning, and they notified her that his plane had gone down. And they asked if they could call my parents. And so they called my mom and announced themselves as, you know, we're from the Air Force. We wanted to let you know your son's plane has gone down in Iraq and his body is missing. And my mom happened to be, she had just baked my brother a bunch of cookies, and she was getting into her car to drive to the post office to mail those cookies. And she received this call and was just absolutely devastated. But she also held out hope, because we weren't informed that he was deceased at this point. He was just missing. His body was missing. So my mom held out hope that he was still alive and that he had escaped. And that was the hope that she was holding on to. But she was devastated. So she ran over to her neighbor across the street, and her neighbor called my dad, who happened to be at work at Shepherd Air Force Base on a military Air Force flying installation. And my mom's neighbor called him and had him come home. He was never called or notified. Yeah, that notification process, I just could have done so much better.
Yeah. And then how did you find out?
So my mom's neighbor called me, and I was sitting at work, and I immediately left work and called my husband, and we went home, packed a bag, and headed to my mom's house. She lives about 2 hours away from us. Mm-hmm. So we immediately went there, and then we just waited. We waited for more information, and it just didn't come. And my mom, you know, we saw the first video on the news where the Al Qaeda was celebrating on the wing of the airplane. And so my mom said, no more. So we didn't turn the news on or look at the internet.
Was that within the same day or 24 hours from getting the call that his plane had gone down?
Yes.
When you saw the news? Okay.
Yes.
God, that had to have been awful. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. It was on immediately. And that's why the Air Force that's the reason they said they had to rush the notifications, because it was already hitting the news.
Yeah.
But so that was happening on a Monday. It was on Wednesday when my uncle finally called my mom, because she was still holding on to this hope. And he directed us to this picture that was out there that showed my brother. And you could see he was not, because his scalp was gone. I mean, his brains were exposed. So he was not alive. And that was how we found out that he was dead.
Did anywhere in that picture or that website say his name, or did they have a picture of his ID at that time?
Not at that time. They were not displaying any of that information at that time. This is just a couple of days. Oh, I'm sure the picture went up much faster, but I mean, we saw it on Wednesday.
Okay. So when you saw that picture 2 days later, did y'all all believe and accept that he had been killed?
Yes, in our hearts, we realized that he had. And then on Friday night, around midnight, we received the official knock on the door with the men in uniforms that came to notify us that they had recovered skull fragments and brain matter that was in that canopy, the glass canopy, still in there. And they were able to do DNA confirmation and recognized that he could not have survived without that brain matter. So that they said he was KIA at that point, killed in action.
And Ron, I'm going to put this out there that there is so much to your story that